Well, good evening. This is again a Three Principles Pioneering webinar. We are going to have as a guest tonight Jeanne Catherine from the USA. Jeanne is a researcher, a facilitator, an innate health practitioner, but she's also the organization's muse and visionary leader. She's magnetic and charismatic. Jeanne's passion is nothing less than infectious. And with a remarkable aptitude for translating complex knowledge into the digestible and compelling information, she has a true gift for captivating and inspiring our audiences. Based on her personal and professional experience, Jeanne is driven by the transformative potential of innate health and realization and passion for empowering women and people who have been disenfranchised to take back their voice and take action. She is steadfast in her commitment to using science to improve the way mental health programs are designed and accessed so that even the most marginalized groups are supported in leveraging their own capacity for well-being. As IHR's Chief Operating Officer, Jeanne is responsible for project design and implementation, research dissemination, outreach and education, and practitioner lived experience collaborations. Jeanne uses her free time to empower women through self-knowledge, using her skills as a mentor, a mediator, and a teacher. You will often find her on the dance floor, guiding all kinds of bodies through movement, music, and magic. Now, may I give you the floor?
Sure. Thank you so much. It was a very lovely introduction. So thanks for that. So welcome everybody. It's so nice that you took the time to be here. I usually start by just finding out a little bit from the audience about what you hope to gain when you're in this, you've spent this time, you've put aside this hour. So if one or two of you would like to share something about what you hope after this hour you would learn or walk away with, that'd be super helpful. Annette? Wendy's pointing at you. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll go. So thank you so much for having this time. Is it Swire or Swear? Swear. Thank you so much for having.
Swear. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for hosting this time. And Jeanne Catherine, sorry, I have been following along with the evidence basis for the three principles for a few years now. As I mentioned, I am a nurse, and I personally and professionally, I am absolutely reaping the benefits of understanding how the human experience works through our friend Sid Banks' work. And I really love to be able to ground everything I say or what I point to in science, for good or for ill. That's the way I've been trained and brought up. So I know there are a lot of people who say, I just know it in my heart, know it in my mind, and it all makes sense. And that's good too. But there's something in the world that I swim in the waters that I swim in, where the evidence basis is really an important factor to bring into the conversation. So I'm looking forward to learning more from you today. So thanks so much for you for taking the time.
Okay, great. Anything else before we?
Annette, go ahead.
Well, I think what Wendy said is also something for me. Yes, because I also find out that it's sometimes difficult. I am also surrounded by some people who have degrees, and also, yeah, sometimes feel it's a little vague. So of course that, but also I always love meeting new people in the three principles. So I'm also very curious about, yeah, how you are going to bring this, because from my experience, every new person brings me also something new. So I have no expectations, but just look forward to hearing more from you and your perspective and your path until here. So I'm very curious.
Great. Well, perfect. You're in the perfect place then. I can relate to that. I do like hanging out in 3P circles. There's some really interesting and lovely people, honestly. So that's always a nice thing. I want to share that I wasn't always a researcher. So unlike Wendy, who's coming from more of a scientist background, I actually got my BA in dance and theater. So I did not have a research base. One of the things that I did learn as a dancer was introspection, which is not something that students are typically taught. And I would say it's something that's really missing. It's missing from nursing, medical, teaching, this capacity to sort of self-reflect, to sense and to look within, and then to sort of express that, identify that, and articulate that. It's something that even our high school students would benefit from. So in some ways, while I was not a scientist, I often feel like I got the best education for a scientist because I started with myself and examining myself, examining my experience and making sense of it. So the reason I really was a dance and theater major was because I really struggled academically. I had so many mental health issues myself that my mind was very full. And it was very difficult to spend a long period of time on one subject. It was very difficult to manage different subjects at one time and to hop from, to a paper that might be 20 pages. And I spent a lot of time feeling overwhelmed, dealing with PTSD symptoms from my own history and experience, and so dance and theater was a real outlet for me and a healing path for me. Having said that, once I personally came into the principles, it was a game changer for me. So some people ask me sort of like, how do I get that? How do I get that white elephant or whatever, white buffalo or whatever you want to call it, this magical transformation? And the truth is, it's not something that everybody needs. Not everybody needs a magical transformation. Some people are doing fine with life and they get some help from understanding how their psychological system works, but they don't need a big change. I think I did need a big change. I was spending an inordinate amount of time helping myself, taking care of myself, managing myself, and nobody told me it could be any different. So because I was up against these very severe or what psychology considers sort of dangerous feelings, and I don't mean to smile as I say that, but now I have another perspective on it. Because I was up against that, the psychologists were very serious and led me to believe, innocently, that I would need to stay in that kind of thinking in order to survive, in order to create any kind of life or living that would be safe and secure. And so what the principles did for me in learning the principles, I learned that I have this capacity really for, I would say, a sense of agency, which is something I do see in our qualitative research quite a bit, where people will move from a sense of like, I'm at the mercy of this emotion, I'm at the mercy of my abuse, to, oh, I have choices about how I respond. I have choices about what to do with this, right? This memory of abuse or this real time thing that's happening. Of course, so there's that. Okay, I come from a personal background where my life was transformed because I had this understanding. And the first thing I did, like most people who have a big shift in their life view and in their mental health, I started sharing it immediately. I became a 3 principles coach. I taught for 7 years. I ran a school. I held a conference. I had a podcast for 4 years. I was deep in. And I found myself asking questions like I had been encouraged to do in my BA in dance and theater. How does this work? What is the end goal? Who gets to partake? Who has insights that are transformational? Who doesn't? Is there something we could describe on this side of the veil, since we can't see the other side of the world, right? Maybe there's something spiritual, maybe there's not. No matter your position on that, there are things we can describe on this side. And I found myself wanting to do that. I found myself wanting to research, wanting to find out more, and wanting to understand better how this system of thought that Sydney Banks pointed to fit in with psychology. You know, can it change psychology? All those questions. And I think fundamentally the thing it has always I have a real passion for is I can't believe how many years I spent suffering, and it was really one thought away to spend my days not suffering. Now, does that mean I never suffer? No, of course not. I'm human, right? Like, of course I suffer. But it is a very different experience now. There is a lot of grace. It is easier, smoother, quicker. The lows are not as low. You know, I'm grateful for the highs. The highs kind of last longer. And dare I say, they're not highs anymore. They're just the pleasure of being, right? Of living. So having said all that, I got to the point where I decided to go back to school. So I had gone through a pretty intense divorce process with somebody who liked to go to court a lot. And I was, you know, trying to pay those bills and trying to put myself through school while raising these two children. And so I was doing that when I came into my understanding. And one of the things I learned right away in exploring the master's program with this understanding was one, because of my understanding about this system, this psychological system, I could do the academic work. And I had never been that person, right? And in fact, one of my teachers said to me, you should get your PhD, which totally shocked me. I had never thought I was going to get my PhD. And I was like, really? I should get my PhD? And so then when I was writing my thesis, the person who mentored me through the thesis process for a master's said, hey, by the way, there's a new PhD program. I think you'd be a perfect fit. You need to apply. So again, I had mentors, right, in my life who were pointing in that direction. And I wasn't done. When I finished my thesis, I felt like there's so much more to explore and to understand. And so I did apply to that brand new PhD program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And so I entered into this program with other adult students. And I have to say, there was a lot of richness to being in a group of adults who have children, who have sick parents, who have jobs, you know, like, and coming together and saying, you know, we've had something meaningful happen in our world, and we want to understand it, and we want to make sense of it, and we want to be able to talk about it. And so being able to study alongside those people was really helpful. And one of the things I noticed right away was that studying and reading and thinking deepened my understanding. So I always feel a little tentative when I hear people say, like, there'll be somebody who has an insight and they're like, oh, I think I'll go for my PhD. And I'll hear three people discourage them. Like, don't go for your PhD. It's like a waste of time. It's intellectual. It's not where the understanding is. And I really want to speak to that because I think our paths are really unique. And I think when we're listening and we're opening up to being, we make choices that may look outside in, but are absolutely inside out. So for me, pursuing a PhD was an inside out job. I felt called to do that. I had questions that I think only a PhD could answer. And that kind of support was what I needed to go deeper in my understanding. And so the more that I did that, even though the very first week of my PhD, I counted how many pages we had to read, and it was 600 pages a week. And I remember thinking like, wow, I'm probably going to fail at this. Like, I'm not going to be good at this. And I think it took about 2 years of coursework before I started feeling like I could read an article. When I started writing better, right? My third year of my PhD, I felt like, okay, now I can write a paper. So it wasn't as if the process was natural to me. And, you know, I didn't feel like I could do this. This is easy and I'm going to win or something. I felt like I'm going to do this and probably fail, but I want to do it anyway, right? And I think it's a pretty important indicator for something that's inside out. that were not motivated by some kind of cherry or that were intrinsically motivated. Having said that, I did learn. And one of the things I learned was there wasn't a lot of great research. There was some research, some small studies, and there was nothing coordinated. And at that time, when I was learning that, one of my clients, my former clients, called me and said that her father was interested in investing in research in the Three Principles community. And I agreed to reach out to him, and we had a conversation, and he wanted to invest some big dollars in research. So I volunteered to help him find some researchers to research his program, his ideas, or the Three Principles, really, programs. And what ended up happening was those researchers weren't interested in the topic, they were interested in the money. And ultimately, I did volunteer work for a year. I know it was really interesting. Anyway, we won't go into detail about that. I thought I had found the right researchers, but they clearly just really didn't get it. They're very skeptical. And skepticism is good in research, but you want to be like open to something might be here. You don't want to be just like, nothing's here, give me the money and I'll find out nothing's here. You want to be kind of like objective. So having said that, after a year of volunteering, I was doing the PhD, I was volunteering and having these conversations with researchers and trying to helping Ron set up a request for proposals and writing this stuff for him. And ultimately, I was spending less and less time on my business. And so by my second year of my PhD, I was not recruiting new clients. I wasn't doing individual work. I was deep into this process. And Ron said, why don't we pay you for the time you're spending on this? And I was like, great, that sounds great. So in some ways, I became a researcher completely unexpectedly. In some ways, yes, I was going for my PhD, and yes, I was learning about research, but there's nothing like being a researcher to learn. There's nothing like it. And immediately, Ron McVetti, who I just have to give an incredible amount of credit to, recognized that what we needed was a way to measure the change. And in order to measure the change, we have to decide what is changing. What is changing and how do we measure it? Does that make sense? So what we decided to do was we hired this guy who is a statistical independent, social scientist, had done a lot of work in criminology, and did a lot of survey design and really kind of he has a real passion for survey design, I would say. And his name is Adrian Denkers. So Adrian and I worked on what we call now the Innate Health Scale. That was the very first thing we did as a team. It was the very first thing we did as a business, was how do we design something that measures the change? And what we were thinking happens, what we were hypothesizing happens, was we thought that probably what was happening during the program is people were changing their understanding of their own capacity for innate health. And I actually think there's quite a bit of literature for this, not just in 3P world. If you go back and look at William James, if you go back and look at Maslow, if you go back and look at Carl Rogers, if you go back and look at, Viktor Frankl, what you're finding in all this conversation, that's just one field of psychology, right? That's just sort of one line of psychology. You can also go and look at Jung, or you could look at the Gestalt work, or you can look at, I was going to say, some of the stuff in mindfulness, some of the stuff in these different fields are talking about something that's accessible that you can't see. And I would say that's true for positive psychology as well. So you have these conversations that are happening in dispersed fields. They're not talking about it together. And they have a lot of different terms for this thing. And some of them you are familiar with. Mindfulness might have some overlay, right, with this idea of innate health. Compassion might have some overarching connection. The other thing is mindset. I think mindset is fascinating. So there are these research and the studies going on that are kind of pointing to, like, there is this capacity for human realization, And this realization can be life-changing, but it also can just be behavioral changing, right? And once people recognize that this thing is accessible and it's within and it has kind of a quality or a feeling, then people change their choices. They make different behavioral decisions. Now, that's a different model than what I would think of as a cognitive behavioral model, right? So in psychology, the dominant model right now is cognitive behavioral therapy. And in that model, you have a thought, you deal with that thought, that's a problem, and you try to retrain yourself, you retrain your behavior, and then you try to get the outcome you want. That's sort of the thinking behind it. With this model, an innate health model, we're really talking about how a system works, not we're going to go in and change one behavior. So this gets to really my thinking as a researcher. You know, I think one of the things that's happened in psychology is we are really good at identifying risk factors, right? Really good at it. We're even good at recognizing which factors are good, positive factors, right, for what we want. But what we end up doing in psychology is we identify those factors and then we go test for them and then we try to teach those factors. So for example, in prison, which is I'm most familiar with that literature, what's happened is we've recognized that people who have, let's say, very reactive, they don't have self-control. We recognize that those people are at high risk for reoffending, for problems in the prison, for aggression, all kinds of things. So then we create a program, right? The cognitive behavioral group creates a program that addresses self-control. Now, my theory is, right, what I hypothesize is that that's not an effective therapeutic target, right? You cannot use the factor that we use to measure change as the therapeutic target. We need to use something that affects change in self-control without talking about self-control, in essence, because people have a very difficult time sort of like, oh, so I need self-control, so now I'm going to will it into my life. That's actually not a very effective technique. And more we're seeing cognitive behavioral therapy has a ceiling, what we call, you know, sort of like there's a certain amount that's helpful, but then at a certain point, it's just not helpful anymore. And I would say the ceiling is that this kind of change, this qualitative change, happens because of insight and realization, not because of personal will, if that makes sense. So as you can see, I'm talking about things, you know, that go beyond talking about just the three principles. The three principles are a way of thinking about this system. And we use those three principles to design our innate health scale. And we did that very early on. We created 20 questions based on three principles. And we used Sydney Banks' Missing Link book to define each of those principles. And then we tested those questions. And I do want to say there were other scales that had been created. There was a scale by Thomas Kelly and Jack Pransky. There was a scale by Judith Sedgman and Bill Pettit. And before we created our scale, we tested their scales. And what we found is it was just not reliable in people who didn't have the lingo. So we wanted to be able to create a scale that anybody could take. And we know, Sid Banks said many times, that people have this within them. You can't give it to them. So there should be some people who test high on the innate health scale without knowing any of the three principles lingo, or without knowing the constructs. So that was really what we did. We went through that whole process. We spent months testing those scales. Then we spent months developing the questions. And now we have spent years testing the scale. And we're really excited about the scale. The paper that is coming out in the next few days, week, I don't know how long it takes for them to publish. The paper that's coming out is actually a mediation analysis of this scale in Nottingham prison. So what that means is we not only tested before and after the men in the prison received the Insight to Wellbeing program, which is fully based on the work of Sydney Banks, we also tested, does the innate health scale have a relationship to these outcomes? Could it be making these outcomes happen? And we compared it to self-control. We compared it to, I'm going to forget, but probably a social bias. And we were really pleased with the outcome. Self-control in criminology is recognized for mediating change. So it's not just that somebody has self-control and they happen to not hit someone. Somebody who has high self-control chooses not to hit someone. That is why they do not hit them, right? So for innate health to measure as efficiently as self-control, it either means it partners with self-control. It could be the reason self-control changes, right? We don't know. We have more research to do. This is a really significant finding in criminology, and I would say has broader implications. Okay, so I've said a lot. I want to say about the innate health scale that it's now down to 6 questions, and I want to share with you what it looks like. Before I do you have any questions about anything I said or any wild concerns? Just like, oh, I just have to move this out of my way before you go on. Okay, is this interesting?
Yeah, I was trying to write it down when you said it. I'm probably gonna have to listen to the recording, but basically you said something about, does the scale itself have impact on the outcomes? And that confused me.
So the changes that happen to people, we're seeing those changes in the scale. So for example, they take a survey with a well-being scale, with a self-control scale, with an innate health scale, right? And several others. Most of them are standardized scales that have been tested. We know they work. Then we take that before and after. What we're seeing, and I'll share with you, we'll just talk through it. Let me share that with you right now. So you can see this, right? Oh, there we go. Everybody can see this. I can't see you. There you are. I'm going to move you up so that I can see you. All right. So this is the article that's going to come out. It's coming out in the journal. It's called Criminal Justice and Behavior. Very solid journal. Very excited about it. This is our definition of innate health. So this is what we decided to go with based on the research on what has been written before. An inherent human capacity for accessing creativity, wisdom, and clarity. We believe people have this capacity, and we want to see how understanding this capacity exists changes people's emotional, mental health, behavior across, a number of measures. This is the innate health scale. The reliability is about 0.78. It's almost an 8, which is great. And we're still developing, right? So as we test the scale, we'll see what happens. Each of these constructs come out of mind, consciousness, and thought, which are called the 3 principles. This is what we looked at here. We looked at this innate health intervention. We looked at outcomes. So we did both pre and post to see if there was behavioral, psychological, psychiatric changes. And then we looked at what mediates those changes. So what is causing these things to improve? And so what we found was the innate health and self-control work together to help create change. So what that means is when somebody's innate health score went up, when they had a bit better understanding of their own innate health, they had increased levels of well-being, decreased levels of aggression, decreased level of depression, and increased level of self-control, in fact. And then we also looked at self-control as a mediator. So again, we're looking at when self-control changes, is it just happen to change next to well-being, or could there be some relationship that self-control changes well-being? Now, if you want to get into the statistics of that, you will have to talk to my statistical guy, Dr. Adrian Denkers, who's not here today. But for most people, this is as far as they want to go with that on this kind of call. This is the study that we did. So we had 127 participants. They were all on the same wing, and they were recruited all at the same time, and they were exactly the same groups. The same guys were in the wait list as in the control, as in the intervention. And then before, we had 61 people in the control group fill out a survey, and we had 66 people in the treatment group. And then after, we had 52 fill out a post survey and 42 fill out a post survey in the treatment group. Now, what's important about these numbers, if you don't know anything about these numbers, what's important to know is that while these are small numbers, that the groups are the same, and that we were in a prison where people have a huge amount of movement. So it was just incredibly lucky. Honestly, we were able to get any post survey. And I want to point out that this was a 3-day intensive. So this is something we've been looking at too. How long, before it's useful, right? And like we have found one day to be completely useless. One day of 3 principles training, completely useless. But 3 days of principle training, that's we've got some interesting results from a 3-day training. I would say from the qualitative interviews, which happened later, the people who went 2 or even 3 times to the 3-day training had the biggest changes. So, we might really encourage 3 principles coaches and facilitators to teach longer trainings or trainings that circle around. I have some opinions about that, but I really encourage if you run a program or thinking about running a program to have some kind of community thread that continues so people can keep dipping in. And so we can talk about that. These are the demographics, which means like they were all men. They were average of 32, average of 32. They had this kind of education. About half had attended secondary school. About a third had gone to some form of college. So that's a little bit about them. There were a few who were incarcerated for life. There were a few who had just been there a few months or a few weeks. These are the changes in well-being. So well-being actually was a significant change. So when we talk about significant, you're going to see in these pictures, but significant means it's like really a greater change. Like sometimes you'll see in the pictures some change, but it's not significant. It's not that important. Well-being was significant in all kinds of ways. And what's interesting is that the treatment group actually started off with lower well-being. And we don't know why that is. It was not a significant difference between the waitlist and the well-being, between the waitlist and the treatment group. There was not a significant difference, but there was a slight difference. Yeah, Wendy.
Sorry, I just want to make sure well-being is determined as a subjective sense of self, as opposed to, gee, you've got a good haircut and you don't smell bad and your teeth are brushed. It's not anything objective. It's completely, well-being is completely subjective.
Yeah, these are psychometric surveys that have been designed to capture somebody's experience of themselves. So Wendy's absolutely right. We did not do what you might call triangulation, where we have people report on the people in the study. Like I see their hair is good, I see they're cleaner, or things like that. That hasn't happened yet, but we do have some qualitative data, which I'll show you a little bit today. The pro-social behavior, that was a really good increase for the people in the treatment group, and I saw a lot of this in the interviews. We were able to compare the control group to the intervention group in interviews, and that was really fascinating. So I'll show you that. Also, aggression went down in the intervention group, so that was exciting. They actually came in at a slightly higher level. Again, it wasn't a significant difference between the 2 groups, but they scored higher subjectively on their surveys in aggression on their way into the program. Self-control went up, and this is a really good outcome for a program in prison, especially a 3-day program, something we look for. And then innate health went up, which is one of the things we're measuring, right? Their own sense of their access to this understanding. And so we looked at what's called a regression analysis, I think, although it's a GEE analysis, maybe I'll stick to that. And we found that changes were explained by innate health and changes were explained by self-control. Changes were not explained by social desirability bias, which normally you would think that would have an effect, but it did not. And it's good we tested that, because this is an environment where social desirability bias can be an issue. Then the last thing I'll say is just about the qualitative portion. This has not been published yet. So this is, sort of just sharing a little bit about what we're finding there. one of the things that really impressed me about these interview groups is they were sent to me anonymously, and I didn't have them in two piles, right? So there were 8 or 9 from a control group, and there were 13, I think 12 or 13 from the intervention group. So it's just a small pool. They're mixed up. I'm reading them, and I'm absolutely putting them in two piles easily. And the reason I'm doing that is because two things. One, the intervention group talks a lot. They share a lot about their lives. They're vulnerable in a way that the control group just wouldn't even dream of being vulnerable. And they say things like, now I know. And so you see in this word cloud, the word know, K-N-O-W, is huge. That's because it was repeated so much. Now I know this. Now I know that. Uh, the control group didn't use this word, I know, but the most used word in the control group was no, N-O. So when the interview, I know, isn't that interesting? I think it's fascinating. So the interviewer would be like, have you experienced any changes in the last 3 months? And they'd be like, no. Or if they did experience change, it would be a very short sentence like, I gained weight. I didn't get there's this thing where you can progress in prison. Maybe they got that or they didn't get that. But all the things in the control group were outside in things. You don't really have control over your diet in prison, right? You don't really have control over you don't have a lot of control over where you are, whether your telly goes or not. A lot of things are out of your control. And so that was significant in terms of the qualitatively between the two groups. The other thing that was different, and maybe I have some slides about this, was this sense of pro-social behavior, emotional regulation, and sense of agency. And so the men would say things like this: I'll wait 2 days and then I'll come and talk to that person. Just because you're an officer, don't mean you can treat us and torture us in that manner. I've approached this officer like 4 times, and now we've got a good rapport with each other. Now this officer gives us positive comments. We talk to each other. This, has so much in it but it's really a sense of agency. This guy did not give up. And, he would have if he had been in any of those control groups, right? Because the officers and the people living in prison, they are like two completely separate groups and really don't fraternize, don't treat each other necessarily in the most humane ways. And so this shows a tremendous amount of humanity, I think, and sense of agency. One of the things I liked about what the guys said and the qualitative is they talked about this. They didn't teach me something new. They just reminded me what I already had. I'm not searching for something to try and get better, really. I had everything inside me to use. And whenever I read that quote, it makes me cry. I just think it's so beautiful that somebody living in prison is finding something within them that nobody can ever take away. And so I'll leave it there. I do have a COVID study I'll talk to you about, but I'm gonna just ask you if you have any questions about everything or anything I just talked about. And feel free, yeah.
I'm so happy about this, Jeanne. This is exactly what I think we need in this understanding, and take it as broad as you want. I don't care too much, but it's wonderful to see this. By the way, I was in the COVID resilience study.
Oh, good. I'm finally giving you the results.
Great.
And in fact, I have a list of people who were in the COVID study who said they wanted the results. So I'm putting together an email to send out with this information.
Yeah. I never had COVID, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So maybe natural immunity.
My wife did, but I didn't.
Oh, lucky guy.
Yeah.
How was that to hear that information? Was some of it accessible? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. To me, it was very, very accessible and very, yeah. The slide before, the quote before about, now we talk to each other. No, the one between now we talk to each other and the one that makes you cry. Was there another quote between?
No,
Oh,
but
okay.
he was
It's
talking
probably
about
just the fact that, the two people were talking to each other and they found a way to bridge in their humanities. That's just really, yeah, it's just so wonderful. And like you said, the fact that this other quote with the person saying, I've already got it. And it reminds me, you said earlier the name Viktor Frankl. He said, you can take everything, you can strip me naked, you can make me whatever, but you're not touching this
Yeah.
or this. You can't have that. It's not yours to have.
Yeah.
It's just so beautiful. And all these people you mentioned, William James, Viktor Frankl, Maslow, et cetera, that's like my nursing curriculum 101, so it's it yeah,
That's
so yeah, I haven't been, I mean, this is a very exciting 45 minutes for me because like I say, that's such a track in my head as a nurse and evidence base. And I've been hungering and thirsting for it. And I don't know that I've ever had the experience where I've heard anybody in the 3P world say, oh, you don't need to go to college, you don't need a PhD. Thankfully, I don't know that I've heard that. But I can imagine it, so it's not like it's completely foreign, but I haven't thankfully
yeah.
heard
Yeah, I
that.
mean, it's
So
hard to tell from the outside if somebody's working from intrinsic motivation or not, right? Like that's something that's really for each of us to decide. And so I just encourage everyone who listens to this webinar later, if you feel the call, like go for it. More PhDs are better as far as I'm
right,
concerned.
you're right.
I do want to give Tyree Dingle, Anna Debenham, and that group some real kudos. So there was this project that was funded by Three Principles Research and Consulting, which used to exist and no longer exists, because we decided to move into a nonprofit or model called Innate Health Research. But we previously had funded this research that was done in a jail in Portland, Oregon, and that research was a randomized control trial. So our research was not, although it was a good environment for what we were doing. They were randomly assigned and they had great outcomes. So they are already published. They published in October, and the first author is Dingle, Dingle. So definitely check that out. It was a women's prison, so that was exciting for us. And we wrote a lot about their paper in our paper that's coming out this January or February. We just thought they did a brilliant job. So the other thing that's happening is what we've done a lot of projects. So, and I'll just share, maybe that's just a simple way to show how many projects we've been involved in. Our website at innatehealthresearch.com. I'll just share with you. If you go here, you can see our conference. We have a video that presents this information and other information at a conference we went to at the British Society of Criminology, talking about 3 different populations we've been studying. And we have reports, and then we also have projects. And so we were federally funded to help with the dissemination and research on the research end of the Spark program. It's a big grant. It's a randomized controlled trial, and it will be delivered over 5 to 7 years. So that's something that we're working on. We are in partnership with the University of Central Lancaster. We're doing a midwives project with Aaron Turner's program. So he has an online program that's delivered over, I think, 10 modules that are being delivered to midwives as they come from other countries into England. And so we are asking them about their experience, first about their experience, what's going on for them, and then second, as they go through this program, what impact does it have? We have this Men Living in Prison project, which is now really getting into just publication phase. So we're doing a lot more writing. We have the Yes Project, and I just want to say about that, this is an opportunity for any facilitator to be able to get a link from us and share it with their participants and help us develop and build a way to measure across different facilitators and different programs. So we've created this common measure, and we're testing this program to see. It's really called the Real World Data Project right now. This is not a peer review project as much as it's in a development stage. And so if you know people who are facilitators who may like to measure what's going on or be a part of this project, please feel free to put them in touch with us. Go ahead, Wendy. Oh, you know people. She's just like, oh, I know people.
Yeah,
I want to.
Me and Swear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing we're doing is the measurement project is really improving that innate health scale. We really want to continue to develop it. We want to test it with thousands of people. We want to get it to the point where it's reliable and make any changes we need to make in order to make sure it keeps being able to show us something, right? Be able to measure this thing that we are calling innate health. We also work with Coventry University. And A Slice of Happiness. It's run by Caroline Powell and her facilitators in Watford, England, with mostly some home insecure, but really sort of job insecure people who are getting support, being referred to her program for mental health support. And so we've been measuring that. We have right now have about 45 interviews with those people who have gone through her program and are in the process of analyzing and writing up a report. There is an initial report from our first 6 months. If you want it, you can go to our website and pick it out. So that's some of the things we're involved in. I just want to give you a sense of our scope of our projects. There are a few of us on the team now. We brought on Anita McVinty, who's a wonderful, very experienced, both grant writer and researcher. And she is my partner. We're both co-leads. She plays more of that CEO role, and I play more of that sort of organizational development role and senior research role. And then Nikki Bouchard, who is located in London, England, has been our directing manager and also really helping to make the research happen on the ground, because a lot of our projects are in the UK, ironically. And they don't want Americans to be handling their data. So Nikki is there with these university partners. And so I can help with the analysis once it's de-identified and anonymous. But she is on the ground meeting with people and enrolling people. And it's been really lovely to work with her. And then each project has its own team. And so one of the things I do want to say about research for the 3P community, especially, is many research teams don't necessarily work with people on the ground. So think of researchers as really growing up in what for many of them is an ivory tower, and like coming up with their ideas, going and testing them, coming back. And so one of our goals is to really look at how we conduct research and to incorporate people into that process. And so one of the things we have been doing is both presenting at conferences with some of our program partners and lived experience partners. So when we went and presented at the British Society of Criminology, we invited Derek Mason, who had been in prison when he experienced the program and now facilitates, and I'm sure will be on this show or has been on this show because he's amazing. And then, Jacqueline Hollows was there, and our partner at Coventry University, Dr. Billy Brown, was there. It's just an opportunity for people to put in their voices, to ask for their needs to be met, to look at how things work as a group. And our hope is to continue to develop that so that we can continue to grow that process of working together in research. Last thing I'll say is just that the COVID resilience study was really interesting. And I'll share a little, I have to end the show. My hand's not warm enough or something. my computer is spinning. So tell me, do you have any questions while my computer spins?
Well, this is amazing, and it's so valuable. Can we also, as separate coaches, use, for instance, the questionnaire you've developed?
But the best thing I would recommend if you're interested in using the questionnaire right now, because it's still under development, is to get involved in that real world data project.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would email Nikki, N-I-C-I, at innatehealthresearch.org. Mm-hmm. You would let her know, like, I'm a 3 principles coach. I'm really interested in your innate health scale. How can I help develop it? How can I get access to it? And then, we run the survey through our Qualtrics account, which is an account that sets up a survey anonymously. And we're developing the tools and the technology we need to really be able to do a pre-post, give a report. That's our end goal. It hasn't happened yet, but it's happening.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful.
So did you say NICI@innatehealthresearch.com.
.org.
Yep.
Great.
NICI@innatehealthresearch.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to mention was when you're talking about like bench science and real world, there's plenty of PhD beautiful studies that are sitting gathering dust on somebody's. And in medicine or nursing, we called it translational research, right? So is that what you're referring to, is taking it off the shelf and applying it in real world situations and getting better data?
Yeah. No, that we are absolutely all about translational research, including putting together short clips, 2 or 3 minute clips about the research for people to watch and see what's going on, what the potential is. The more that we increase awareness about what's possible here, and alongside that, develop programming that can scale up. So that's a big issue in the 3P community. I think one of the things that the 3P community needs is an objective way to measure how somebody's program is doing. And so we are getting to the point where we're going to be able to provide that. So that it's not so subjective, like, oh, are you teaching 3P? Are you really doing what Sid Banks said to do? I mean, it's kind of a subjective thing a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I would really encourage the 3P community to embrace some kind of objective measurement, even if there's a qualitative component still, because I would say it's kind of qualitative when you talk to each other and you feel like you can get settled down. That's a kind of qualitative experience. That's a little more subjective. But we really need to have an objective measurement. Is the program working? Are people's innate health increasing? Are there changes in mental health? And this is a field that needs change. It's ripe for transformation. Oh, yay, my computer stopped spinning. I can see you again.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Can I share this with you before we go? Now we're getting to the end here. This is a poster of the COVID study. What's interesting about this study is that we asked online to anybody who would answer our survey 2 times about their experience of COVID. And we asked a lot of questions. So this is just like one little piece of the puzzle. But I was interested, when we asked these questions, I was interested in how people's sort of belief systems, impacted their sense of well-being or anxiety or resilience. Now, this study can't really tell us if your philosophy impacted these things. The only thing the study can do is compare different philosophies and compare levels of well-being, levels of resilience, level of innate health. And so we call this a correlational study, right? We can't claim from this study what I'm going to tell you. We can only say, like, it looks like this happens and we should do further research. So what it looks like happens is that people with an innate health understanding, meaning that they said, I know 3 principles, I know Sydney Banks, I have been doing this for a long time, and they measured higher in innate health. As you can see in this graph here, they measured higher in innate health. Those people also had higher levels of well-being that stayed pretty consistent first and second times. This is a month apart. One time was towards the end of April, and one time's toward the end of May in 2020 when COVID hit. Okay, so we were quick to get the study on the ground. They also had lower levels of anxiety compared to the other groups, and they were also consistent. So there wasn't a dip and then a recovery. They also had lower levels of depression than the other groups. Okay. So then here you can see we broke it out by denomination. So obviously 3P people had higher levels of innate health. That seems kind of obvious to me because we're asking questions related to these 3 principles. But they also had higher levels of resilience that stayed fairly stable. They had lower levels of anxiety compared to these other groups. And you can see the agnostic and atheist group really leaps in anxiety the second time around. So their anxiety has just increased. But most of these philosophies have increased. And
That's
then
fascinating.
it is really, I think it's fascinating. Thank you. And then depression went down after 1 month. So it was a little high, but again, it was pretty consistent in the innate health group. So in the resilience conversations and research, there is this model for resilience where they've tested the population and they found these are the different trajectories after an adverse event. So a trauma or a pandemic, right? So here's this adverse event. And then these are the kind of pathways people take. One pathway, which is a little unusual typically, is this pathway where number A, where they don't really dip. They just are consistently resilient. They just kind of motor along through the adversity. The more common pathway for most people is a dip and then a gentle recovery over time, not necessarily to the same exact place, but there is a recovery. Less common is no recovery, like just like, down. That's very rare. So anyway, having said that, what we see in this innate health group is that through the pandemic, at the first and second time, a month apart, they were pretty consistent, right? They had a pretty solid sense of well-being. They had lower anxiety. They had lower depression, and they had higher levels of resilience, in fact, throughout that were consistent. So that's what I'll say about this group for now. I did present this poster at a conference, at the International Positive Psychology Conference. And, that's good. I would love to see it as a little note in some journal or something. We just didn't have enough people on the ground during COVID to help with moving this into analysis and into a written piece. And so that's something that, we hope to grow this year and next year is funding for, PhD postdocs or writers, or funding for our projects so we can continue to grow. So if you want to know more, please feel free to check out innatehealthresearch.org, innatehealthresearch.org. We are a nonprofit, and we really believe that this type of psychological approach can be a transformative model for communities. And that was the last thing I want to share with you. Something that I've been seeing in these 3 principles programs is what we call wraparound community support. So they don't just deliver, in prison for a few days and go away. They keep coming back. They come back and they come back. And this is something that these groups are largely deprived of, right? They're deprived of education. They're deprived of access. And so number one thing our mental health programs need to do in communities, they need to have mentors from the community. They need to provide wraparound support, and they need to have no barriers. And so I'm just going to encourage you guys to ask for that, to encourage that in your communities, in terms of policy, and to encourage other 3 principles practitioners, like keep offering webinars like this, keep getting on the ground and making things available, free, and embracing, right? And humanistic, dare I say. So any questions before we go? I'm so sorry we ran out of time.
I'm curious, when you present like that poster on COVID to the positive psychology group, what synopsis, what 2 sentences do you say, this was the question, 3 principles, Sid Banks? Like, how do you phrase, this is the measure that we're taking, the people that know this stuff, the people that don't know this stuff? What is this stuff? How did you describe it?
So, and we just simply use our definition that innate health is a person's capacity for creativity, wisdom, and clarity. And that we were asking, when people recognize they have this capacity, then these are the kinds of results we see, at least correlation, right? So we need more research. There is a randomized controlled trial that was done with teens in Florida. I think there are 2 articles out about that randomized controlled trial, which was very positive. And that program is similar to the program we studied in prison, the Insight to Wellbeing program, in terms of they have a manual. Not all 3 people will have a manual. I understand there's some concerns about that, but I do encourage people to make a manual that allows for flexibility and insight so that we can research it. So.
Okay.
I'm really blown away. This is beautiful. I've loved this. This is so valuable. I have a background in research, not scientific research, but marketing research. But we did a lot of statistics in the past too, and this is beautiful. And I know Aunt Adriaan also. You know that probably too. We've met before. We've been talking about possibilities to see what we can do together, and hopefully we can. There's some opportunities now arising somewhere in a long distance, but maybe it will work out. We'll see.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna have to.
Is this recording going to be made available?
Yes, it is. It will be on LinkedIn. It will be on Facebook as well, but we also publish it on our 3P community site. We've got a 3pcommunity.nl site, and where we are posting all these videos. 3pcommunity.nl.
www.3p. Is
Absolutely.
It the number 3p?
It's 3. Yeah, the number 3, then P, and then community.
Great, thank you.
.nl. So it's a Dutch-speaking community, because we also cover.
Yeah, congratulations on your new king or queen or whatever. Somebody's new.
Well, he's been there for 10 years now. So.
Oh,
No,
I
it's
must
Denmark.
have the wrong country. Was it Sweden?
It's Denmark. It's Denmark. It doesn't
Denmark.
matter.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's almost
It's close. It's close to us.
It's close. I have to run because I have to pick up my child from school. I'm sure she's
Thank you
not
so
happy
much.
right now, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very
everyone
much.
so much. I really
I
enjoyed
loved
meeting
it.
you.
Loved
and
it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
We'll be in touch.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.